May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our hope. Amen. Well, perhaps this is the day. This is the day that God has made, of course, but perhaps this is the day that we are hearing a story where it is so abundantly clear what the point of the story is that I don't really need to tell you about it. You get it right away. It isn't, unfortunately, but it might feel like that when we hear stories that begin with, "This is what it's about." The tricky part of this story, though, is it isn't Jesus who says, "This is what this story is about." It's the author of the Gospel of Luke who says this story is about being persistent in prayer. And then Jesus said to them, that ought to right away raise some question as to whether, in fact, the story is about being persistent in prayer. And if that isn't enough already, let me also point out that if this story is meant to be about how you should be persistent in praying to God, you are a bothersome widow, and God is an unjust and horrible judge. Do you buy that? I don't. So I have questions about whether, in fact, this is actually about being persistent in prayer. Let me also say, though, that I'm not entirely convinced that it isn't about prayer, because it's also followed by another famous story, which is the story of Jesus and the disciples seeing the Pharisee coming to pray and the tax collector coming to pray. Do you remember this story? Where the Pharisee gets up and does the whole fancy praying thing, and the tax collector, who's a sinner, stands afar off and beats his chest and is humble. And Jesus points out which one of those is actually going away right with God. It's the sinner, because the Pharisee's basically faking it. So perhaps it is about prayer. But it could also be about something else. Earlier this week, Alan Richards sent me a link to a blog post from somebody who suggested that, in fact, the author of the Gospel of Luke put the story there and used it that way, and that Jesus didn't originally tell the story for that purpose. That, in fact, the story isn't about prayer at all. It's about the importance of standing up for justice and against structures and people in society who are unjust, and to be persistent in that, to never give up on that. I think that's a really good point, because that is, in fact, what happens in the story. The judge doesn't give in because the woman's case is just. He gives in because she's harassing him. Nothing, that doesn't change the judge at all. In fact, I suspect after this he continues to go on being just as horrible as he was before. Just let me clarify that, what I mean by horrible as he was before. We've, I think, perhaps talked about this business of fear in the Bible before. And yes, quite often it does mean scared. But fear of the Lord is a way that the Bible is trying to tell you about how awesome God is and how we should be in awe of God and respectful of God. Appreciate God for this amazing, wondrous thing that God is and what God does and how God would like us to live. So the unjust judge, who has no fear of God, is in fact not doing that at all. It's not that he's scared of God. He's clearly not. And he also has no respect for people. I don't think I need to name any names or say governments or authorities in the world that might not automatically spring to mind with that description. So it's important to stand up to them. The story doesn't even tell you what the woman's issue is. It does say justice for to her accuser, But it doesn't tell you what the issue is, nor does it tell you that the judge cared what it was. It just says he gives in because she keeps harassing him. Here's how I see it. Excuse me. I know I'm bringing this into a much more contemporary context, but I see this as she showed up one day, he told her to get lost, so she showed up the next day and stood in front of his door and kept bugging him, and then she showed up the next day with a sign, and then people started to ask questions, and before you know it, there was a whole group of people protesting this judge. Again, does that sound familiar? Because it should. Because I think that's what Jesus is after here. Perhaps the story is about taking a stand for things that are unjust, speaking truth to power. But perhaps that's how Jesus understands prayer. Think of how often that expression has been used. Thoughts and prayers. A horrible thing just happened, so we're going to offer thoughts and prayers. And I bet if Jesus were there, he would say, and then you're going to do what? And unfortunately, thoughts and prayers has come to be a thing that people say when you know darn well they aren't going to do anything, and they could. That's not how Jesus understands prayer. Jesus understands prayer, I think, as the conversation that you have with God, the intercessions that you offer to God, the thanks that you offer to God that inspire your action, particularly when it comes to justice, particularly when it comes to respect, particularly when it comes to the care of others. It's really easy to say thoughts and prayers. It's another thing entirely to take action based on that. John Lewis, who might be, actually if you're British, you might think that's a department store chain because it is. But John Lewis was a famous civil rights activist in the U.S. In the 60s, he marched with Dr. King, and he took part in sit-ins and the peace marches, the freedom marches. He was at Selma. He was involved in that whole movement of peaceful protest. And then he later became a congressman. He died, I think, just a couple of years ago. But one of the things he famously said often is he quoted what I think is an African proverb, "Pray with your feet," which is exactly what he did, and encouraged other people to do as well. I think that's something that Jesus would truly appreciate as a saying, pray with your feet. Take action. Don't just leave it as, I'll offer a prayer and then everything will be fine. The point of that prayer ought to be to inspire your action. There's lots of things that we can take action on. And that action might be as simple as bringing food to the food bank. It might be as simple as helping somebody fill out some forms because apparently they suddenly now have to reapply for something that they thought they had already. It could be showing up at a protest. It could be signing on to a petition. It could be simply taking action that you think is appropriate to take. Just do something is the point. It's not enough to simply say thoughts and prayers. It's not enough to simply say, I think what you guys are doing is really good. That's awesome. We need to do something. And that is the life of Jesus, isn't it? Taking action. Trying to inspire others. Think of how often we tell stories about Jesus where people have gone away inspired. The classic one that I like to remind people about is that feeding of the 5,000. Since it's World Food Day, that seems appropriate too. But we tell that story as if Jesus went shazam over some loaves of bread, which is fine if you believe that the power of Jesus is about making things happen that other people cannot simply do. That's fine. But if the point of Jesus is to show us what we are capable of, then I think what that story is about is how Jesus inspired others to share, which, by the way, is a freaking miracle to begin with. But he had very little and offered what he had. And then I think somebody else went, you know what, I have something, and I'll share it. And before you know it, everyone's sharing food. It's a giant potluck. Because I cannot imagine in those days that you didn't say to yourself one morning, you know what, I'm going to follow that guy around all day and I'm not going to worry about whether or not I'll have any food. I think in those days you would have packed something to eat later because you know there's no fast food joints to go to, there's no restaurants. You would take something with you. So I think everybody had a little something that just for themselves, that they were not going to share, and then Jesus inspired them to share. They were inspired to action. It does say Jesus blessed the loaves that he had before he shared them. So he offered a prayer, and then he did something about it. And perhaps that inspired other people to do that. That's still a miracle. It is. And it's a miracle that can happen every day, that you can make happen every day by inspiring others to take action, by taking action yourself. There are so many things going on in the world right now that require that kind of attention. Millions of people did it yesterday. Routinely, people are starting to do that in Alberta over a particular issue right now, trying to draw attention to something that they believe is unjust. If you believe it's unjust, you should say something about it, and you should take action about it. It doesn't mean you're going to fix it. Never did Jesus say, go and fix it. He just tried to encourage people to take action, to make the world a better place, to bring the kingdom of heaven here. And you don't do that just by praying about it.